The Ghost in the Chair by Lettice Galbraith and read by Christopher Halton. 150 men saw Curtis York take the chair, when by medical evidence he'd been dead for hours. This story requires explanation. The explanation will never be given because none of the theories of cerebral pressure, spectral illusion, or hypnotic influence by which people try to explain away the inexplicable can get rid of the single fact that shortly after 3 o'clock on a certain Friday afternoon, 150 sane and sober men saw, or thought they saw, Curtis York take the chair at a general meeting of the San Sacrada Mining Company Limited, at which time, according to subsequent medical evidence, he must have been dead for several hours. For some time, his friends had known that York was going a little bit too fast. While hardly more than a boy, one brilliant hit had gained him a reputation in the city far beyond his years, and at an age when most men are expending their superfluous energy on the tennis court or river, he was finding brains for the working out of several big undertakings. 6 years of unbroken success taught him to believe his luck infallible. When that changed, as sooner or later it was bound to do, he began to lose confidence in himself. Like many men who keep a level head in prosperity, he could not play a losing game, and for months past anxiety and overwork had been telling steadily on his nerves. Moreover, he was superstitious, and though he made no profession of religion, he retained an odd belief in the puritanical dogmas of hellfire and a personal devil. This in some measure accounts for what he said to Fielden 4 days before his tragic end. The directorate of the San Sacrada Mining Company had been holding an extraordinary meeting. A crisis was impending, and things looked black for the company, which was no bubble speculation, but a sound and solid concern suffering from the effects of a persistent run of bad luck. Now, luck has more to do with the making or marrying of minds and men than the moralist would have us believe, and the luck of the San Sacrada Mining Company had all along been execrable. Unexpected hitches had occurred in securing the title to the property. The contractors had seen fit to export the machinery reversely to the order in which it was required. Delays had been caused by a scarcity of water, and when at last the returns promised to justify the small fortune sunk in the shaft, the Yankee manager, whose appointment had been backed by flaming testimonials, demonstrated his native cuteness by skipping out with $25,000 of the company's money. His place was filled by an Englishman in every way qualified for the post, but before the good effects of this change of administration could become apparent, the mine was flooded, and all operations for the time being perforce suspended. Nor was this all. Unpleasant rumours began to circulate as to the stability of the concern. It was said that money had been borrowed at a ruinous rate of interest, that the company was insolvent, that the very plant had already been seized by their creditors. One of the financial journals got hold of the story and treated it after its own inimitable fashion. The company brought an action against the paper and won their case, thereby incurring heavy law expenses and advertising the scandal for the public to a man read the offending article, while only a very small section took the trouble to acquaint themselves with the proofs of its inaccuracy. The shareholders grew restive, and it became known that the forthcoming general meeting was likely to be stormy. It was then that the board held their extraordinary council. There was much discussion and many futile suggestions, but no resolution was passed, because if the situation were to be saved, it would be the work of one man, and he hadn't had time to think out a plan of action. This was the chairman, Curtis York, who, having nothing to say, had said it exceedingly well, and was now aimlessly scribbling on the back of some papers lying before him on the table. The boardroom was almost deserted. 4 of the 5 directors had gone home. The 5th remained at the special request of the chairman, who had then relapsed into silence and hieroglyphs. A casual observer might have judged his occupation mere idling, and interrupted him without hesitation. Fielden knew better. He not unfrequently annoyed his own clients during important interviews by adorning his blotting pad with minutely detailed presentments of cutters and yawls, and he understood that miscellaneous sketching may be on occasion the outcome of deep thought. Therefore he waited, leisurely drawing on his gloves, until at the end of 20 minutes York, without lifting his head from the paper, began to speak. He said in a low, even voice that the company was going to the devil, that there was only one man who might be induced to see them through, and he was on the continent, and his exact address uncertain. That the most important thing now was to gain time, and for that purpose they must find a smart junior, a man who could talk and wasn't too well known, give him 5 shares and a cheque for 50 guineas, and put him on at the general meeting to impress the shareholders with the necessity for keeping quiet. He went on to say that the Saint-Sacré mine was the third venture that had gone wrong within 6 months, and that he, York, regarded it as an omen. That if it came to grief he should never do another stroke of business, that he would be down and done for. But that it should not come to grief, because he intended to pull it through at the price of his own soul, that he was prepared to sell his soul for that end, and he believed the sale would shortly be concluded. At that moment the fire crackled, and York jumped as if he had been shot. Then he laughed rather awkwardly, and explained that he had not slept for a fortnight, and his nerves were all to pieces. "I believe," he said apologetically, "that I've been talking damned rot. To tell the truth, I don't know all the time what I'm saying. It's this beastly insomnia. But you understand what I want for Friday. I made that clear. We must have someone to tackle this Simpson brute, or he'll carry the whole meeting with him. Nothing the board can say will weigh with the shareholders, but a split among themselves may gain time, and time is money to us just now." Fielden thought he knew a man who would do, and he asked who Simpson was. "A dirty little outside broker. The miserable beast hasn't more than 100 shares in all, but he's quite capable of upsetting our cart as things are at present." "It is always the smallholders who give the most trouble," said Fielden, preparing to go. "I'll see my man tonight and send you a wire in the morning. If I were you, York, I'd look in at my doctor's on the way home and get him to give me some bromide or something. You're running under too big a strain. It isn't nice to hear a sensible man talking nonsense about his soul. If you came out with that sort of thing at a meeting, the reporters would say you were drunk. Besides, there's no demand for the article nowadays. They are altogether too cheap. Good night." York went with him to the door. It was raining hard, and the evening air felt raw and chilly. He shivered as he returned to the empty boardroom. His head felt heavy, and there were 2 pink spots on the green cloth which worried him. He sat down again at the table and began to play with his pen, writing odd words on the blank sheet of paper. He certainly had been a fool to let himself go in that way before Fielden. He must have been a bit off his head. And yet it was true. He would sell his soul if that would ensure his coming safely through this business. His soul. Fielden had said souls were cheap. If city men had souls, what mean, shabby things some of them would be. York tried to imagine what one would look like and laughed. His laugh was not good to hear, and yet it was a big price to offer, for it was the last possession of the human being, the only thing he has to carry out of this world into the blank beyond, and it could burn. He remembered a picture he had seen as a child in an old Bible of souls burning in hell. Souls with human faces horribly distorted by pain. Yes, that was the end of lost souls, hot fire. The rain swirled against the long windows, and York's teeth chattered. He was cold now, and the company was going to smash. He had said all along if this venture went down, he should go with it. It had come to mean everything or nothing to him, and to know for certain that he was going to pull it through, he would sell his soul. He began writing again, the words forming themselves automatically beneath his fingers. "I, the undersigned, hereby covenant and agree to guarantee the loan of such moneys as shall cover the working expenses of the Saint-Sacré gold mine for the space of 6 calendar months, and further to ensure the complete success of the company, in consideration of the surrender of the soul of Curtis York, chairman, at such time and for such purpose as I may hereafter determine. Signed, X his mark. It was the merest vagary of a disordered brain, but York's heart gave a great bound as he read and reread the words. Then his jaw fell, and his face grew set and rigid with terror, the terror that wipes out all manly strength and courage, and leaves room for nothing but an abject, shaking cowardice. The perspiration stood out in great drops on his forehead, and his eyes were bolting out of his head as he gazed at the paper before him. On the blank space left for the signature, the letters had come out in characters that shimmered and glowed as if they were traced in a flame. Every drop of blood in York's body went to his heart. For one awful moment he remained paralyzed and immovable. The next, with a desperate effort, he had seized the sheet of foolscap and, staggering across the room, flung it into the fire. The thick paper shriveled, curled, and broke into a blaze. York snatched up the poker and stirred the coals to a fiercer heat, crushing the charred fragments into the glowing embers. Then the poker fell from his hand with a crash, and he sank into the nearest chair, shaking and sweating like a scared pony. The clock on the mantelpiece struck 6, and the sound recalled him to a sense of mundane things. He stood up and passed his hand across his damp forehead. "Good God!" he muttered. "My head must be going. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Fielden's right. I'm running under too big a strain. I'll see Jones at once and get something to pull me together." He put on his overcoat and went downstairs. A clerk was coming up the passage with a telegram in his hand. York stopped under the gas burner to open the yellow envelope, and his face turned a shade paler as he read the contents. It was the message for which he had been waiting all day. The address of the one man who could save the company. This happened on Monday. By Wednesday afternoon, York had reached Paris, seen Van Houten, and brought their conference to a successful issue. His conduct of the transaction was throughout masterly, and aroused the great financier to an almost paternal expression of admiration. "You are very clever, young man," he said to York at the close of the interview. "I have watched you for 3, 4, 5 years, and I say to myself, he does go far, that boy, but he will arrive. What? You made von little mistake last spring about those Guatemalas. That is nothing. I myself have also made mistakes. You are young. You buy your experience. So, but in the end you will succeed, for you have a head. Mein Gott, what a head for a man so young. You see, I have belief in you. I lend you my influence. I trust you with my money because I look for you one day to do great things. There is no fear. You will succeed." "I shall succeed this time," said York. He took leave of the big man gratefully, for Van Houten had been a good friend to him. When he got back to his hotel, he locked himself into his room and drew a paper out of his pocketbook. It was an exact duplicate of the weird bond he had burned in the boardroom on the Monday evening. Impelled by an insane desire to see if the horrible delusion would repeat itself, he had 3 times rewritten the document, watching with a painful admixture of interest and dismay the ghastly signature come out on the white paper. Then, in an access of terror, he would destroy the evidence of his unholy compact, only to reproduce it on the first occasion he found himself alone. Meanwhile, the treatment prescribed by his doctor exercised a slightly beneficial effect. He did not sleep, but his brain, on the single point in which he was vitally interested, became phenomenally clear, and his powers of endurance appeared to be practically unlimited. In the 3 days intervening between the board and general meetings, York did the work of 10 men. On the Thursday night, he devoted himself to the preparation of his speech. He told his servant, who left him in his own room at 11 o'clock, to put a glass of milk and a siphon of soda beside the bed, and on no account to disturb him in the morning until he rang for his shaving water. He was then writing. The man went to bed. York must have worked late into the night, for he had made a fair copy of the rough draft of his speech, and added several sheets of notes. When the speech was delivered, it was noticed that, contrary to custom, the chairman used no notes at all. He brought with him no papers whatever, and he arrived very late. The room was packed, and the general temper of the meeting so manifestly turbulent that Fielden's neighbour had given it as his opinion that if York did not turn up soon, neither he nor anyone else would be able to obtain a hearing. The words were scarcely past his lips before the tall figure of the chairman became visible amidst the crowd surging about the door. He wore a heavily furred overcoat which he did not attempt to remove, though the atmosphere was oppressively close. As he made his way up the room and took his place at the table, a peculiar stillness became apparent. It originated with those in the immediate neighbourhood of the chair, and passed like a magnetic wave over the entire audience. Gradually the indeterminate hum of voices dropped, wavered, and died away. When Curtis York rose to address the meeting, he was received in absolute silence. The speech which followed was the most remarkable piece of oratory ever delivered at a company's meeting. It comprised the entire history of the San Sacrada gold mine, with details and statistics, several of which, unknown at the time even to the directors, were subsequently verified by telegram and proved to be absolutely exact. York's manner created a profound impression. He spoke for an hour without a single hesitation, and he held his hearers spellbound. Not an argument was wasted, not a point lost, not a possible objection left unanswered. The man was transfigured by his intense earnestness. His face was inspired, his whole person dilated. He predicted the future success of the company with the authority of one who knew. Every word he uttered carried conviction, and when at last a vote of confidence in the board was put to the meeting, it was carried without a single dissentient. Then an odd thing happened. Without a word the chairman rose and left the room. The crowd fell back, making a way for him to the door. His disappearance was succeeded by a second of dead silence. Then Fielden, acting on an impulse for which he could never afterwards account, sprang up and followed. He wasn't more than a minute in gaining the stairs, but when he reached the passage, York was nowhere to be seen. He hurried out onto the pavement. A brougham had just pulled up at the curb, and someone called him by name. It was the doctor whom York was in the habit of consulting. He said something, the drift of which Fielden did not catch, for he was looking up and down the street, and answered by the question uppermost in his mind. "Have you seen York?" The reply was startling. "Yes, poor fellow, but there was nothing to be done. He must have been dead for hours. His servant begged me to come to you. He says there are some important papers which you—" "What the deuce are you talking about?" Fielden interrupted impatiently. "York's no more dead than I am. He has been at the meeting since 3 o'clock. He has only just this minute left. I followed him downstairs." Then, catching the peculiar expression of the medical man's face, he added warmly, "I'm neither mad nor drunk, Dr. Jones. If you don't believe me, go upstairs. The whole meeting's there, reporters and all. Ask them who took the chair this afternoon. Dead men don't make such speeches as York has just given us." There was no doubting the sincerity of his tones. Dr. Jones considered a moment, then he asked a rather singular question. "Did you," he said, "speak to Mr. York yourself?" "No, he left the room suddenly without addressing anyone individually. I thought the strain had been too much for him. He had spoken really magnificently, and I followed, but—" "Ah," interjected the other softly, "I think, Mr. Fielden, I must ask you to come back with me. There are papers about of which you, as an intimate personal friend of York's and a representative of the company, had better take charge. Besides, you may be able to elucidate—" "Do you," said Fielden, "seriously expect me to believe in the death of a man whom I have seen within the last 5 minutes? I expect nothing. I merely tell you that Mr. York was found dead in his room at 2:30 this afternoon. He had given orders overnight that he was not to be disturbed until he rang, but his servant, knowing he was to attend an important meeting at 3 o'clock, became uneasy, and after repeated attempts to obtain admission, broke open the door and found his master, as I have said. The man at once sent for me, also for Dr. Lewis of Harley Street. But of course there was nothing to be done. Mr. York must have been dead for at least 5 hours. The body was quite cold. The cause of death was cerebral apoplexy, brought on by nervous pressure and prolonged mental strain. I have known for some days that he was in a serious condition of health. The brougham rolled noiselessly on its way. Fielden was staggered. His mind refused to take in the full meaning of the doctor's words. Neither man spoke again till the carriage drew up at the chambers which York occupied. His servant was waiting for them in the hall and led the way upstairs. The bedroom was in disorder. The candles had burned down in their sockets. Papers were scattered over the writing table and floor. On the bed, which had not been occupied during the night, lay the dead body of Curtis York. "He was found here," said the doctor, indicating the writing table. "Evidently he was working up to the end." Fielden had been standing by the bed, reverently looking down at the still face on the pillow. The door of a wardrobe opposite had swung back. As he raised his head, his eyes fell upon York's fur-lined overcoat, and the events of the afternoon came back upon him in all their weird improbability. He crossed the room and laid a shaking hand on the doctor's arm. "What does it mean?" he asked hoarsely. "What does it mean? I saw him, I tell you, not half an hour ago. I heard him speak, and yet he is dead. For God's sake, what does it mean?" "I don't know," the other answered simply. "There are some things that won't bear explanation." The affairs of the company were very much on his mind, and turning over the papers lying on the table, he added, "He was preparing his speech when the end came. Look here, is this anything like what you heard?" Fielden looked, and a smothered exclamation escaped his lips as he glanced down the closely written pages. He was reading word for word the speech to which he had listened barely an hour before. The eyes of the two men met, and Fielden nodded. There was a pause, broken only by the rattle of a passing cab. A corner of the hearthrug was turned up, and the doctor stooped mechanically to straighten it. Under the fold lay a piece of paper. It had dropped from the dead man's hand and remained there unnoticed since the removal of the body. Fielden heard his companion draw in his breath with a soft, sibilant sound, and looked up. "What is it?" he asked. "Convincing proof, if any were needed, of that poor fellow's mental condition. Good God, what a strain he must have been running under before things got to this pass. Read it for yourself. What do you make of it?" Fielden read, and there came back to his mind the words York had spoken in the boardroom 4 days before. "I am prepared to sell my soul for that end, and I believe the sale will shortly be concluded." It was the last copy of that extraordinary document by which the unhappy man believed he had saved the San Sacrada Mining Company and lost his own soul. On the back of the paper, York had written, "My friend Fielden has said that there is no demand for souls nowadays, that they are altogether too cheap, but he is wrong. The devil is never weary of bringing men to destruction, as I am proving, at what cost is known only to myself. Though I am now past hope in this world or the next, I solemnly swear that I did not seriously intend to register this shameful bargain with the powers of darkness. In a moment of abstraction, hardly knowing what I did, I wrote out the original of this agreement. 3 minutes later it was signed, and I knew that I was lost. I saw the vile name come out in letters of fire, the fire of hell, in which my soul that I have bartered away must burn hereafter. 6 times I have destroyed the outward evidence of this cursed bond, only to be compelled, by a power stronger than myself, to reproduce it, and watch the awful signature again affixed. His share of the compact will soon be completed. My part is yet to come. The surrender of my soul at such time and for such purpose. The purpose I know only too well. The time is yet uncertain, but I feel that it will not be long. I am now tormented by one terrible fear, that the call may come before I have seen the success of the company assured, that after all I may be cheated out of my dearly bought triumph, but that I am resolved not to suffer. Surely my body will have strength to resist, my willpower suffice to claim that last privilege. Come what may, I will not yield up my immortal self before Friday's meeting. After that, I care little how soon the summons comes. This hourly suspense is torture worse than any actual suffering. My brain is burning already. My mind is already in hell, but... Here the writing ceased with a faint downward stroke of the pen, as it had slipped through the nerveless fingers. It was Curtis York's last word. The summons had come. Fielden's eyes were wet as he finished reading. "Poor fellow," he said under his breath. "Poor York, my God, what he must have gone through." He turned the paper over and looked at the strangely worded agreement. The space left for the signature was blank. This is the truth of a story to which no one will give credence, least of all the 150-odd men who heard York's speech at the general meeting of the San Sacrada Mining Company. They will prefer to believe that two competent medical authorities made a mistake of 5 hours in assigning the time of his death. For there is nothing to which human nature objects so strongly as contact with the supernatural, and no credulity equal to the credulity of the incredulous. The end.